Okay, this is a bit of a, I guess, disclaimer about the video. I'm not even sure how to describe it. I just want to say that in this video I do a long unscripted, well, explanation of various things. And my voice does not sound the best. I constantly have a runny nose, and I am really sorry that it's such a bad state, that I'm in such a bad state, but I have to explain that there simply isn't that much time, as in 10 days I would simply not be able to actually record this video properly. As with for that, it's quite a long watch, around the halfway point, a little earlier actually, the tour ends, and there's a big history segment after that, so if you want, watch it. I don't know what to say. And to those who have been a part of the actual Zavolf crew, I hope that this is going to be a good enough actual recollection, or I guess archive, of all that we've done on this server. So yeah, with that, the video begins. So, I need you to imagine this. You have finally gotten to the top of the labyrinth that's going to return you to the spawn hub, and you're walking down that familiar corridor that never has enough light because people keep taking the torches from the stands. You are seeing that everything is fairly dark, it's fairly cold, it's nighttime in this part of the map, but you know that you are going to go to a brand new zone you have never seen before. There's a staircase leading down, it's still fairly dark, the temperature is only getting colder, although you know that there's going to be warmer temperatures as soon as you cross through that teleporter. There's the familiar room that every player spawns in. It has the big text saying Mudwall up there, a sign that was chiseled from metal blocks by the admins. Everything made of slate, different stones, different stone types, fairly well made. The familiar room with all of the rules that seem kind of strict at first, but really weren't too big of a bother. The windows that lead to some kind of strange forest that you could never really access despite the interesting things you could see on the minimap. The metal doors leading below a weird part of the labyrinth dungeon, above it, into the first row of teleporters. There's the first teleporter that leads to Copia, the warmest and safest part of the map where most players are. There was one to Delaware, which was very close to spawn, and one to the Zone, which was previously called Russia and was a bit colder. There was also the freezer where most of the experienced players went, and there was this strange corridor which led around a really big redwood tree. However, there is more to the teleporter room, as there is a path leading up to all of the new zones that were added after the 1.16 update, as it added a lot of new world generation. As you go down here, it's also a fairly spacious room, although it only has 2 new teleporters, with some empty chests that probably had loot at first but were cleared out, some bookcases which cannot be accessed, and a strange chiseled door which really wouldn't be openable yet. There was the first teleporter which led to Albany, a fairly empty place which had been abandoned, and another one which led to Utica, which wasn't the same at first but also lost activity over time. As you're teleported, the weather is fairly warm, kind of strange for Utica as it is temperate and a bit on the colder side. However, this is fairly good news and there's no real reason to complain about such good weather. There's a big path, there's only one really clear way to go forward. There's a big house on the left made of stone with really weird trees on top. A small bridge hastily built to continue the road. And a path that leads further forward as the main road. However, if you decide to turn left, instead of going forward on the big path, you might find some of the most interesting things that most players have not seen on this server. There is a big house. It is very strange. It was built by by somebody fairly early. It has some stuff in it, a graveyard around it, some plants that have long since withered. However, it cannot really be accessed, it has been mostly claimed, so its insides are to this day still a mystery. If you keep going down the road here on the left, going all the way south for a few thousand blocks, you're going to walk for quite a bit, so it is fairly important to get a bit of food, so thankfully there were some berries here. Now, there's nothing really in the distance, so this journey might take a while. I will now try to explain a bit about what this video is going to be about and why it's, well, an hour long. This is a fairly hastily recorded video because I have a lot of stuff that I need to do for school and only a month to record it before this server, actually less than a month. I've only 10 days to record it before this server is shut down for, well, I don't know, until further notice. There was not really enough money or need to maintain the server. It has kind of lost its popularity over time, although I do not know of a single other vintage story server which has such a history. There probably is some older ones, there probably is some servers with more activity, but my entire experience of playing vintage story has been on this server. I did not have any other experience besides an hour of single player and a little bit of modded, of a modded playthrough on a different server. Now, at this point there are some mushrooms and I decide that it might be better to get some additional provisions, which turns out to be a fairly good idea. Utica is a fairly temperate area. It's one of the most normal zones in the entire game. However, one thing that makes it very, very different from all the other ones that you can teleport to is that it is very far away. It is one of the most distant zones, if not the most distant one that can be accessed via teleporter. being approximately 300,000 blocks minimum, I think, from the center of the world, aka spawn. It of course takes quite a while to get there, even if you use the labyrinth, but getting here by foot would simply be impossible. So why was this zone so isolated when the admins decided to add it? This is because the 1.16 update added a lot of new world gen, and for some reason they felt like it would only be there would only be unloaded chunks if they decided to put the zone so far away. Sadly, this means that this area has been very unpopular. There are no ways to make really quick trips between other zones. It is fairly unremarkable if you really look at it. And people were already living their lives back in Copia and other different zones. There was simply no reason to move out here for that little bit of new content when they could simply just walk the distance themselves. There's a cross on this part of the path. It's just a quick stopping point to enjoy the scenery, I guess. However, once you look back you can see the empty forest of birch trees, which it was never really explored. It's just a good sign that there's nothing here. I really didn't script this, but I can't stress enough how empty the feeling of walking through this area is. The game is absolutely beautiful. I don't mean to take away from that. However, the aesthetic of this, it looks so abandoned, so empty, and this one path is the only sign of human activity here. As the path goes, and this is a very interesting part of the path, as I didn't know it existed up until recently checking it, as it was previously a haphazardly built viaduct. You can see the mountains on the left. These were fairly interesting, fairly out there, very easy to see as you cross the path. However, they have also never been explored past their basins. In their valleys, like the ones right next to it, I recall prospecting before, finding some interesting metals. However, there wasn't really much more to see. This area has wolves. You can hear them growling. They are stalking me from the side of the path. I've seen them before. However, I didn't really have the weapons or the need to fight them. I just had to run past them, as they weren't really that interested in hunting humans at this point. Up and further down the path, there is quite a clearing. On the left, Cloudberg can be seen. It is simply a floating island that has been explored. Nothing interesting on it besides some glacial ice that couldn't really be acquired anywhere else. After these long, straight but diagonal facing paths, the road enters the forest once again. This marks the last part of the journey down the path. Somewhere near the end of 2022, this exact journey I had made before with the help of a player named Frolix, and I was traveling to see his new hideout. It was quite a long walk. There were lots of dangers and there was no path to go by. And when I got there, I was quite surprised to see how far he had gone before he set up camp. It was quite an interesting experience. It was like the most normal part of the game. It wasn't anything interesting like a jungle or a desert or anything as extreme as that. However, it really sparked up my curiosity because I had really never seen such a beautiful temperate area before. Slowly, as we get to this lake, we make it to the bridge, the first bridge on this path, as the previous ones had already been crossed. This one was the first big architectural requirement that was needed to be constructed for the path to continue further towards the spawn of this zone. And this small lake really had quite an atmosphere. We had to make sure that the bridge was nice and beautiful because the admins really required it to be that way. If we check the time here, we can see that it's only the beginning of the day, so past this bridge we'll still have some daylight to burn before nightfall gets to us. Now finally, as this hill is walked around, you can see that there are some structures in the background. It can't really be seen. There's a blocked off part of the path which was supposed to be the old way to go around the hill, however it was never built. So past the tunnels, past the different curving hills, and the soon-to-be-seen tiny lake which the path goes by, there's going to be something quite interesting. Further down, around the walnut trees and the pines, which were not here until they were planted, here lies Zavolf. One of the least known about big towns in Mudwall. So, through the museum's underside area, on the town path that leads around here, by the copper lanterns which were built to illuminate the whole place, next to the strange mine that was used to excavate quite a bit of our building resources. And by the animal pen, which had still not been moved until it was too late, and by the cookhouse, by the infamous A-house, the never finished mill, and the slightly more finished mill used for forging, and of course next to the huge factory lies the home that I have spent most of my time on this server in. I will do a short tour now, showcasing all of the different buildings and what they were. First off, it's the Museum of All Right Arts. It was never really finished. It had two different segments. The first one being here was supposed to be a geographical segment. A geological segment, my bad. However, it was never finished. You can see all of the different ores that were gathered in all different stone types, all of the different chunks, rare crystallized variants, all that kind of stuff. It was supposed to be here until we realized it was a bit too ambitious to cram so many rocks into such a small space. So therefore there was a empty void in this part which was supposed to be taken up by sculptures. However, we never managed to accumulate that much art to actually place in here. There was the central cupola, and it was, well, it was empty. It was supposed to have a big statue in the middle, but as with that, we never got around to it. There were some rusty gears. I'm not sure who actually placed it, whether it was visitors that saw that this area was unclaimed or somebody else. But it led directly to the part which had some art in it, which were the two sculptures that I carved and an image, a painting that I had made. Now, the area here was quite interesting. There was a lot of light from the circular windows, and down the stairs there was a still partly unfinished area showcasing all of the findable art in the game, all of the paintings that you could find in the ruins. Although there were no tapestries yet, and there was one of the larger paintings which we never really found to add to the collection. There's a strange bone and obsidian knife here. It's been here for a very long time, but these things just kind of stay around here. This is our pit kiln. We used to make all of our clay products here, and there has been a lot of fired kilns here. We simply needed this much clay produce, and this was the grass that we used to fill all of these pits with. The pile was a lot bigger, but it has run short since now, as grass was used for practically everything, from roofing to firing clay. This is our tree farm, just one central log connected to the outer grown trees, and we'd use it if we ever needed to quickly grow a lot of trees, as it was easier to cut it down and clean it up if we needed to. Past the little rest area, there is a coop full of pigs, which went all the way up to Generation 8, although they never really got further because we were planning on moving them to the new animal area in the Secret Valley, though that never happened. Further by the town square, we can see the cookhouse. It has no windows, as the cellars in the background, they require very little natural light. They can only use artificial light, unless you want the efficiency to drop by quite a bit. This area was used to be full of food, but as I placed down one of these pots full of rot, you can see that it has kind of not been stocked up. Food can't last forever unless you're really, really smart about it, and we simply didn't have the resources to keep that up. We had, of course, the composting room, the currently empty room for grain, which has all of the pots stored away, and a different room for other produce like vegetables and meat. Also up here there was a brining room, past of course the pie cooking area, and the brining room had all of our alcohol making and food brining resources. Of course a barrel full of honey as well for good measures. But this is where we made all of our pickled vegetables and the famous sauerkraut pies that lasted us through the winter. Here is the never finished mill. It was not built by me, it was built before I got here, and it was supposed to be the main windmill of the town. However, our ambitions grew a bit greater, so it was currently being used as the storage area for more specific things. Besides that, there is also the forge, which was fairly small, but it did its job all the way till now. It was not used for mass production later on as we got the factory up and running. However, it was still the place where we made all of our tools. It would have had this automatic helve, but it is currently not functional as the wind is yet to pick up. In the back there's of course the coal pile, all of the different forges, the tool racks, and if we go down here, there's also our banking area for all of the different ingots we had. This vault, or more so just basement, was the place where we just kept all of our precious metals and everything else we need for crafting. There's a big factory here, although we're not going there yet, as there's one more area I wish to showcase. This is our main storage area. The warehouse had all of the crates needed, everything else for storage. It also had a connection to the factory that I showed over there. And it has been running kind of low lately, as it was not designed the best, so it had a bit too much storage for some things and a bit too little for others. Although it still served its purpose, it was very useful, and it was simply required. We have the factory here too, but we're not going there yet, as there is still a bit of stuff I need to showcase. If we go down the side path, which was a fairly recent creation, we can go and see one of the bigger structures, or, what am I kidding, the biggest structure here. This is the factory district, and it starts from right behind the factory. It has these decorative chimneys, a big charcoal firing box, which is above ground, a Hungarian hot bath, which is not hot as it has ice, and has a tendency to try and drown you, as filling it with water was quite a challenge. And even though this is called the factory district, this is one of the least functional areas, as it technically does not include the insides of the factory. This is very decorative. You can see all of these different town squares which you could go into, or plazas to be more exact, as they were far more decorative and didn't have as much stuff around them. Down below the railings there are lots of crocks which were all filled with food. Of course, not each at one time, but they were simply placed here so that I could see how much food was being used up during construction. If we go down here, we can see that you can enter the plazas from underground as well. There's this unfinished side which never had a path, the semi-finished side which was supposed to lead to our underground tunnel system, and it led further here to both of the different plazas. That part which is currently exposed in the first plaza was supposed to go below the actual geology museum, which is the mud brick building in front of us. However, that was never really finished, as the actual museum, same as the actual museum too. It's really a shame, because if we climb up here, there's quite an interesting view, and you can see how big the actual geological museum was supposed to be. The reason for the size, of course, was that each ore could be generated in lots of different stone types. Then that ore could be either quarried or broken for the actual chunk. Then those chunks had rarities, and then if you got a crystallized chunk, that was an extra rare way of getting some extra nuggets, and those also had their different rarities. So all in all, this was a fairly space requiring process, although of course that space never got used. You can see the factory here, you can see like the different parts, the interesting geological features that can be found here. Even in the distance there is that one apple tree which looks strangely bright, although this was never explored together with those mountains over there, as there was simply no need. The forest in the back had a lot of resin though, so that one was kind of checked out, I guess. If we go further up into the factory, we can see that it was built at an elevation. This was an engineering mistake. It was supposed to give additional efficiency to windmills, but this all added up to just a few percents, so it was really not worth it. So now onto the machines of the actual factory, which I'm sure some of you have been waiting for. This right here is the automatic pulverizer. It is a very simple system, although as you can hear by the sound, it was very efficient. We didn't really need to upscale it, and you can see and hear that it had quite a bit of already processed powders which we use for steel making. It could process a stack in about, I think, a little more than 15 seconds, which was fairly impressive, but sadly I do not have the resources to show its capabilities right now, as they're all in storage. Right here is our automatic quern for all of our milling needs. It was a fairly interesting system, as it forced the output from staying in the quern and it all was dropped to the sides. However, sadly, it was not as efficient as we would have liked it to be, as they do have an inherent speed limit, so this system was planned on being upscaled, although that never really happened. Further down we can see the room of the clothier, which I think was... I'll have to check and edit this back in. I'm not sure if it was Taj or Tosca. I feel horrible about not remembering this, but they were the two most recent the people who joined our team after Nikki, and I never managed to remember which one did the clothes and which one didn't do the clothes. This right here was our leather working room, where Frolics would tan all of our hide into leather. I realized at this point that I needed some backpacks. Even though I wouldn't make all 4 of them, I decided to make 2 because I realized I might need the inventory space for the remainder of the tour. I could have used all of the leather I would have needed because this wasn't going to be used later on. However, there wasn't really a reason to do that. This right here are our cremation ovens used for the steel making. You can see they already had a batch in here, but it was never fully refueled to be smelted. And here is the pride and joy of Zavolf. It is the reason that it can be called a factory town. Probably one of the most interesting machines in the server. This right here is a Helve engine. With 8 Helve hammers divided between 4 anvils, it could turn ingots into plates fairly effectively, and it saved a lot of time processing iron and other metals. You can see all of the blooms that were still to be processed. However, we never got around to that, as there were plans on increasing the efficiency of the machine, which we never really got around to doing. If we climb up, there is a fairly insignificant area which I still want to show because it's fairly pretty. It's a small rooftop garden. It leads to the roof area of the actual Helve engine, and you can look around a bit even though the view is kind of scuffed. If I climb onto the roof here, you can see that there was another house up here, although it was a bit difficult to access and it never really had a purpose, so it was mostly here just for decoration. This grass block here, it's quite interesting. There was usually nothing there, and every time I would try to fill it in with cobblestone, it would disappear. And I was not sure what was causing it, but I did it like 20 times, and every time I'd actually lose the cobblestone block. I was like, this is pointless, and just filled it in with dirt instead, because I just needed there to not be a hole in the ground. But for some reason the dirt didn't disappear. If we go up here now to the actual... Oh, maybe not. Forgot which order I walked in. Oh yeah. If we go up here now, however, on the side staircase, we can see the new limestone smeltery, which was supposed to be built. There was a way upwards on this side. On the other side, there was a bit of a storage area, which never got filled with chests or crates. And then there was the uppermost part. It had some free space, quite a bit of it actually, and it was supposed to be used specifically for turning lime powder into quicklime. However, this was never actually... Well, it was finished, but it was never actually put to use, as we didn't have the limestone which we were planning to buy from the main trade dealer in the server, who was Vats. What did they call it? The trade dealer, just like a trader. This is the Helve engine. Oh, my bad, this is the windmill engine which powers the Helve engine, and everything else. All of the power from here is directed to individual machines, so if some are not used, more power can be redirected to the others. And it is a long row of inline windmills. I need to thank Ilm for this design, as he, who usually lives in Glitchendor, or the biggest town in the server, he has usually built this. He has built this kind of design in his house, and he let me look at screenshots of it and try to replicate it. Sadly, I never got to that efficiency because I connected too many windmills to a single drivetrain, and the entire efficiency was simply showing diminishing returns. That is the reason why all of those machines had planned redesigns, as I was supposed to divert more power to different areas. Now, here we are on the almost last part of the tour. This is the top of the factory. It is, I don't know, it is, I think, one of the greatest ways to show. I think Zavolf was quite an interesting town. It was right here on a man-made mountain made of cobblestone that you could see all of the different houses that were built, all of the resources gathered and put to use, everything else, the lights that would shine when night fell, which weren't always present in smaller towns. I think this was like proof of our advancement as a group. Sadly, it started raining. There was no pretty sunset. There weren't the usual red colors we would see. There wasn't like a mix of a deep blue and dark crimson that usually used to fill up the sky, which I'm still quite amazed is even a feature in the game. Even in the distance, you could see some of the parts of the town I had not shown off yet. You could see the clouds slowly getting darker as the sun set beyond the horizon. And I still had one last thing to show. As I go down from the factory, closer to the town square, there's one house that you may have noticed I conveniently never showed off. It is the A house. This triangular house, with a pretty self-explanatory name, was the first house built here. Unlike most of the other structures, I did not build this one. It was built by a member who had left very, very quickly after the town was founded. This is Frolix's home, who is our leader. And it had it was practically his armory, and our armory in some cases when we had bears and had to grab spears. It was quite a small house, but very functional. It had some of the riches here, which he would never let me show off without coordinates, despite them being in a claim zone. However, I think at this point he would also like to see his effort at least get shown off to the world, as he has really gathered a lot of stuff here. This house was in some way the center of the village, even though it became less used as we got a kitchen, a forge, and all of the other infrastructure running. This was the house that started it all. And that's why I want to end the actual town tour with this. Now, on to the next part of the tour. I'm going to actually sleep here, I'm going to pass the night, and I'm going to use the rest of the time here of this recording to explain some of the history of Mudwall. This might be a bit boring to some of you, and I suggest to use this as the end of the video unless you really are interested in how all of this happened, how I got into Mudwall, how Zavolf was started, how the entire crew went, and most importantly why this isn't really that active of a village anymore. So, now in the next part, I'll show off some less important structures, stock up for the journey before I starve to death, and then start explaining how this all really came to be. Now, this is the orchard. It's not as impressive mostly. However, it is quite important, as every time that spring rolled around and the cold winter ended, this place would start getting filled with berries. After only like 20 days or so of flowering and growing, these things would completely turn colorful. Red, blue, pink, all of the different colors. And this was where we got all of our fruit nutrients, all of the vitamins that we couldn't really get from our sauerkraut pies. You can see there were all kinds of different berries, even though we could just have used the monoculture. This is also the place where most of the trees are placed, and as I will show a bit later on, even most of the bees. There's an empty area here. It was supposed to be a pig pen, most likely. And there's also a big farm here. It is a bit rough around the edges. Rabbits constantly got in. You can even see some of them running in the corner there now that I look over. Tall Skull, I think. Maybe also Taj, because I am very sorry if they watch this video. I really have trouble with their names. I can't remember which is which. But one of them carved that Mohai over there, and it was quite an amazing sculpture that just suddenly appeared carved into the rock. Right here is the new chicken pen. It never had chickens. We couldn't make a corral to get them. We couldn't make a tunnel to get them to this corral, but it was supposed to have a fairly interesting feeding mechanism where they could be fed without entering the pen itself. Here is one of the parts that they didn't show off as it was never really built further. I wish I would have walked over there during the recording, but there is an interesting tree over there which you can see for a short second. And it had a really interesting cross shape despite being a tiny fruit tree. But this right here is the secret valley. It was supposed to be the cultural, but even more so residential area of the village. It was supposed to be have a big castle in the back to show off our power. However, it only had this unfinished pen and the lookout point. Besides that, it was supposed to have private houses for us, which we never really got around to building, so we just declared some of the smaller utilitarian houses as our homes. It was supposed to have a library just for the lore update, where we would be able to store books we find and write our own if we needed. However, this was fairly new on our list, and it wasn't that big of a priority, so it never really got built up as far as it should have. And now, I will take a different path back into the village, as there was this tunnel which was built to get back through. There was of course our trusty trader, which traded, I'm pretty sure, some more aesthetic valuables. There were of course all of these bees I never showed off. And now, the next part of the tour, where I won't really be talking about the things I see as much as about the things that happen, is going to showcase our translocator network. Network or 5 or 6 different translocators, all connected up to lead to different areas in our nearby vicinity, to allow us to go to different climates, to allow us to see different areas and get resources which were simply not present here, as, to be honest, Zavolf was already kind of fracked and mined and emptied of resources, at least the more rare ones. Now, as we go through these tunnels, I just want to say there's going to be some fairly scary stuff, such as the bell you can hear. I ran past this deep drifter which managed to be spawned in, and he thankfully decided not to lunge at me just now. But the second tunnel also had a bell. We simply couldn't dispose of them. They were behind the walls and they were just stuck in crevices in the rock. For those who do not know what bells are, they are the most terrifying creature in this game. They're like alarm systems, moving alarm systems which have really gone rogue. They can't damage you, they're very tanky, but they won't try and attack you. They simply call for enemies, and it's not even that terrifying. They're difficult to kill, but they're possible to deal with. But they're just horrifying, just hearing that bell, looking at it, looking around as it tries to hear if you're nearby. It just isn't a pleasant experience. Last part of the really interconnected translocator network is our plantation. The plantation was built here in a warm jungle. It has all of this flax. This is what we use for our windmills, that we really didn't have any other way of getting so many flax fibers. And a massive orchard. This is nothing like the one we have at home. This was built by Sovereign Frolix and I think Taj. And they put in a lot of effort just sprucing everything up, making it very, very, very efficient for making food. This is how we could have some fruits during the winter. This is how we could have this is how we could have the windmills. This was also the place where we gathered the grass for the clay firing and for the roofs, because this place had quite a bit of it and we really didn't need it here. So when our lawns back at home got empty, we started to mow all of the grass here. As I stock up on some oranges, which I really didn't need in the end for the journey, but it wasn't really an issue, as I didn't lose anything by getting them. They were never going to be picked either way. I decided to go further and show off some of the less really notable translocator spots. To explain this, as we go further, they're going to go into a deserty area which we used to get gold, although it was most notable for a fairly interesting geographical structure. And we're going to go further to another area which had some very interesting mountains which looked like pillars going up from the ground. However, sadly, as my map was reset for some reason, I had no way of finding it. So, now I'll try to talk a bit about the history of Zavolf, and maybe, and I'll try to make as few pauses as possible. My experience with Zavolf started from quite early, as I practically got there a few days after the town was started. When I first joined the server, I was actually invited to a special area called the Frustrata. It was quite an interesting mountain placed by a lake called Flint, Michigan, also known, which was called that way as it was full of lead, as it was full of lead. And as I got there, I was a part of this small little town. There was Concretus, who was the leader. He was also the architect. He had this slightly obsessive Greek style, which we used. It was a somewhat expensive way of building, but he was fairly good at building, and it was a very pretty town in the end. However, it had not really moved to... However, it was most notable because it was built on a very big mountain called the Frustrata. There was also Sophron, who... Well, he was, I think, the most active of us all, both there and in Zavolf. And there were some other ones, like Dark Puppeteer, and some other members, which I'm ashamed to say I do not remember anymore, despite their fairly important contributions. I wish I could show off for the Frustrata, but it's quite far away. It's probably been ransacked as it has not been claimed. But that was my start on the server. Back there, I tried doing some machinery, but I wasn't a good engineer back then. And I did do a little bit of architecture, though Concretus did most of it, so I mostly did the roads around there and the bridges. So afterwards, most of the people left after a few months, not as much as leaving the village, but more so leaving the game itself. They decided to return, as I still didn't have enough of this game, although I had been mostly playing in this one village. So, I decided to take a long walk. It was a 80,000 block walk, if I recall correctly, in search of one of the biomes that could be seen in the loading screen of the game. It looked like an autumn forest. It had a forest floor blocks. It had the forest floor blocks as the actual ground. It had various trees. They were all orange, and there were mushrooms on the floor. I was very enchanted by the entire look of this, and I wanted to find this exact forest. To my dismay, I was searching in spring, so there was no real way of finding autumn trees, because there aren't really any trees besides Crimson King maples that have a not green color when it's not. There are no orange trees unless it's autumn. So I still went on this walk. I was really determined to find this biome, and I kept walking. I did a weird circle. I realized I went through so many biomes. I tried going north. I found some very interesting mountains and stuff, but there was no sign of that biome. So I decided to change my plan. On this suicide trip, for which I had only packed food as I did not want to waste any resources that would be needed in the actual Frustrata in case others returned, I decided to walk to spawn. This was 50,000 more blocks. I decided to just keep walking. I think I even have the trip recorded, and I wish I could recover it from my old computer, and I think I'll try. And it was quite a walk. Now, I'll quickly pause here. This area, this viewpoint, it looks alien. It looks like it's from a different planet, and it's honestly quite amazing. When we first discovered this mountain, which is called K227, we had gone here just to check what's up top, and we found some gold in the end. I'll show that area a bit later, but the view was simply incredible. We did explore further down there. It's gonna be possible, I think, to see some of the... Actually, I may have passed those. Up there in the front, the messy area right before the tree is the gold excavation site. And around here there were a few small camps we set up. Just to be able to pass the night and stuff. But this never really went further. Before I continue on with the Frustrata and how I moved away from it, I also want to say for the following parts of the video. At this point, I go further down the translocator chain to the second to last translocator, and I try to go further and explore some of those interesting mountains that I talked about. However, I could not find the next translocator, and since my map was bugged, I never really... I couldn't show it off in this recording, but it wasn't really a shame because I went on a different detour, which turned out interesting. To continue on about the 800,000, the 80,000 block journey, I kept walking, and I really expected to die. At one point, I was at this really interesting marsh. It was like a very deep swampland, but it had different patches of land everywhere. and I stopped. I saw a brown bear and I got really still. I took a closer look. I realized it wasn't actually a brown bear, it was a black bear. I was a bit more safe. Then I heard a roar behind me, and it was an actual brown bear running up to me, and it tried to hit me, but it missed. And thankfully I was in water and I was a faster swimmer at that point, because so many people were online that it was simply lagging the bears out. And I managed to run away. There were some other near-death experiences. Wolves almost bit me to death several times. It was simply a messy experience. There were so many interesting sights along the way till I reached 0-0, such as some really deep lakes, like you will see later in the video. Some extremely tall, pitch-black mountains made of granite. It was an interesting journey, although very pointless, as 0-0 had not been anything interesting. It was not like Minecraft's spawn in 2B2T, where it was an absolute wasteland. It was not a bustling town like it would be somewhere, like it would be on most other servers here. It was simply a tree, which was most likely planted by hand, and it had a plank pillar up top. When I got there, I was disillusioned, and I asked around if anybody knew of such a biome. I got some tips from a player called Frolix, and he recommended to me to either check in Albany or in Utica. I decided to follow his advice, and I asked him how to get to Utica, and he explained to me that I have to go through the labyrinth. I've never been through the labyrinth. I just knew it was dangerous, and you had to go there if you ever wanted to reselect where you want to respawn, where you want to be teleported as your spawning area. I was very worried. I didn't know how to do that, and he offered me to help me get through the labyrinth. I told him I had some stuff I could pay him with, some berry bushes, some stuff like that. And he said that that's okay, but there was no real need for that. We met up, I think it was in Delaware, which was the closest town to spawn. And we started going. We went to a teleport pad. We went back into the labyrinth. He helped me pass through it. If any admins are watching this, I am very sorry to say I cheated on my first way through the labyrinth. I pillared up with blocks. Even though some of you may know that the area is claimed, it is possible to still place the blocks right before, and we'll jump on them right before they're removed, due to the fact that it's in a claim. Same way for anybody who might be joining, which is very funny considering that by the time this video is up, the server probably won't be up. There's a translocator at the spawn area. Do not go through it. It leads you straight to a lava pit. It's designed by the admins so that if you manage to cheat your way through by breaking the blocks and glitching through them, you are going to be killed. That is why I'm so undergeared here. But either way, I went into the labyrinth. I didn't know about that thing, so I didn't really mess around with all of these secret things in the spawn hub. And the two of us went to Utica. At this point, I realized that Sofram was on as well. Since he was back at the first strat, I was quite curious, and he said he had also been disillusioned by the lack of activity over there. He wanted to move somewhere else. And then both of us went to the new town. The town was nameless. It only had the A house, the small path, which wasn't connected to the spawn point. It only connected the windmill to the A house. And it had Frolix, and he said there was one player who built all of this stuff, but who stopped being online for a few days now already. And we decided to take a look. We thanked him for the tour, and we started stocking up to get on the journey. And I felt this place was really nice, but I didn't really want to bother Frolix. Then he asked us if we wanted to join. I thought about it, and I realized yes. And me and Sovereign, we were both fairly good at building, so we offered to be architects. Sovereign started filling up some of the lakes which were around there, as it was a lot more of a marshy area than before. And I started doing some construction, like placing down bushes, preparing the orchid. Although I didn't do much, as we were still hoping the main architect would actually get back online and tell us what needs to be done. So, a few days later, I think it was only one day later actually, it was decided that the other player most likely wasn't returning, therefore we would start construction. And we started building, and we built and built and built. Sovereign used so much time mining out stone. It's such a shame that in this recording I managed to forget to show the factory's underground tunnel system. It was amazing. There was almost almost a kilometer, I think, of a giant underground tunnel. It was a wide tunnel, like reaching 7-8 blocks in height and 4 blocks in width. And it went on and went on all the way from the forest to a cold desert. And I feel really ashamed that I didn't show it because it was all done by Sovereign. He was mining and mining, and his reason for getting that wasn't just to get the stone to get for us to build houses out of. It was also in hopes of finding buried treasure, which, while common, is such a small structure that there is no real way of finding it reliably, as it's never connected to any land. In the end, he managed to get his wish come true, and he did manage to find some buried treasure. However, it was actually visible from the ground, and it was at the bottom of a lake. Either way, we had new people join. We had Tall Skull join, and we had Taj join. The two of them joined. I think Tall Skull. Yeah, I think Taj was the clothier, and he made all of our clothes. He specifically picked that class so that he could make like some special outfits, like tailored gambesons and things. Those were our main armors, as they were amazing for exploration. In the quick detour, there's a storm in the distance. You can see the dark clouds. And then we also had Tall Skull, who he did all kinds of stuff. He helped a lot with quarrying. He built a good chunk of the underground network, the underground translocator network. He's the reason why most of these translocators have underground tunnels and not just like outside leading ladders. And afterwards, let's see, I feel like I'm forgetting somebody. So me, Tall Skull, Taj, Frolix. Oh, and Sovereign, of course, I mentioned Sovereign. God damn, this brings back memories. I really should have written a script for this. Oh, back to the actual story. We continued on with the town. We started building a road, which is the road that I walked at the start of the video. It was an enormous task. Roads are really tedious to build, especially if you want to keep them pretty. And this was something that was very amazing, but sadly it was very rarely used. It was simply, there was no reason to go here unless you wanted to visit it. And to be fair, we had 5 or 6 players visit it, and they were all fairly interested and they liked the place. However, we really didn't have some other groups. There was a thief house I walked past. It was a larger area I showed off in the beginning, but I never mentioned it. That house had a lot of rocks in it. It was owned by some guy who stole stuff from claimed areas using bugs. So he was banned, his area was unclaimed, and everything was free for the taking. There were some other players too. In the beginning, if I had gone straight on that road, it would have led to another small town, which had its own history most likely. However, the players in there had stopped playing long ago, so the few houses there were quite a mystery. And besides that, sadly, I couldn't find that much stuff in Utica. I feel like there is most likely a whole bunch of history that I never managed to uncover simply because it was too far from the actual spawn point. But it's depressing that most of this will not really be uncovered. The server just has such a complex history. It's so amazing, and I'm really, really sad that most of it won't really be... most of it I won't be able to see. Now, as we built stuff further, I got the idea of building a factory, a collective place for all of our different windmill machines. And that was so complex. We built the heightened area, which would give the windmills like a wind boost. We built all of the infrastructure around it. To be fair, I did most of like the actual construction. However, the resources, those were gathered by Frolix, mostly Sovereign. Sovereign was really determined with mining. And all of the different components were gotten by other people as well. We had to import a lot of resin for the components. It was an extremely complex task. And in the end, it was worth it. It wasn't the most efficient factory, but it was quite theatrical, quite theatrical, and it was quite a thing to be proud of. Now, in this part of the actual video, I will show off something that I never planned on showing off because the journey to get there is quite long. This part right here is It was supposed to be a path. It was never finished as a path. And it leads to Nikki's house. Now, some of you might know Nikki from my previous War Thunder videos. He is a very good friend of mine, previously only an online friend, but it turns out we lived like right next to each other. And I managed to convince Nikki to try the game out. I bought it for him. Did I buy the game for him? Maybe I didn't. I think I bought the game for him. I'm not 100% sure. I can't believe I forgot this. I think I bought the game for him. And basically I told him we might want to go somewhere else and try to play through the game from the beginning, because it would be not really that fun if you just went or immediately got the steel tools and really didn't have anything to do. This was from my previous experience with Worlds Adrift, where I managed to turn a friend away from the game because we really didn't go through the beginning as well as we should, and he just got disillusioned by it. We walked around. Me and Nikki walked around for a whole real-life day in the server, trying to find places in Copia. We found amazing spaces, pure black granite beaches. We found a huge mountain practically made of olivine, and we even wanted to live there for a while. However, sadly, not even sadly, it was just straight on my fault, I felt extremely uncomfortable there. I felt like everything was watching us. It was old chunks. Somebody had already explored it, and there was too little food. There was too much. Just, it was weird. I did not. It felt wrong to stay there, and in the end, we managed to move back to Zavolf. Nikki, however, continued on after I had to go to sleep, and he kept walking, and he managed to walk a whopping 10,000 blocks with just his little in-game experience, and set up camp in a very distant area. And this area, which is now just known as Nikki's place, it became a huge exporting source of lead. And this lead export is what allowed us to make a lot of the lanterns for the museum. It was basically, we used the lead to make mold de chalcos, which is this really hard to pronounce decorative alloy. And even though it was just supposed to be like a small base that he would use to progress through the game, it kind of went forward and turned into something a bit more interesting. I have to lower my render distance at this point because there's so much foliage that even my computer can't really handle, even my new computer can't really handle all of the foliage when it's so windy, which I think will be ironed out soon enough, but it's not that big of an issue. Now, Nikki's place, well, it was quite interesting because it turned out to be a resource gold mine. First off, there was the lead, which was really close to the surface, and it was everywhere. Then there were the deep underwater lakes, which I couldn't really show off because it was nighttime, so it just looked like a huge void. And there were also just huge deposits of iron. And it was one huge deposit of iron, but it was like very dense. It was filled up to the brim, and when we mined it, we got more than we could ever process in a few months of constant work. So I will try and I will show that off later on. I mean, I won't show off the vein itself because nobody really is interested in just walking in underground tunnels. But as I passed the first redwood lake, which presents the first half, which shows the first half of the journey to his house, I'm going to try and skip forward and just speed up the rest of the video, as this is just walking through some fields. Now, as we pass this area right here with all of the sandy beaches and the mountain, or more so hill in the background, we get to this trader. And if we go around him and behind him, we can see an entrance leading into the actual mountain. If we run past all of the drifters and we walk back down to the bottom, there's a very shallow translocator. and passing through it before anything gets to us leads to the actual path that leads to his house. This has cut the journey in length by in half. It's now only 3 or 4,000 blocks from the initial 11,000. Who am I kidding? Even more than 11,000 if we include the other parts of the journey. And this path, which as you can see has not really been finished, has it leads to the house. This was one of the most recent things built here, after it has kind of been abandoned as Nikki had stopped playing too. Well, I don't really have anything to say here. This is just a cold desert. This place was, the desert area at least, had quite a bit of olivine in it. And it had some other resources, but yeah, nothing special to really mention here. But I remember I listened to Blue Oyster Cult for the first time while consciously knowing that it's a Blue Oyster Cult song here. And since I became a bit of a fan of the band, this was probably like the start of it. There's like the forest here, which was full of bears and probably is still, but I just was lucky enough not to run into a single one. And there's a whole bunch of trees. Now, on the minimap you can see a lot of these lakes. They're not as amazing here, but soon enough you will see that they have quite an interesting feature to them, which I had mentioned before. Despite it being nighttime and it not really being as visible, it's going to be kind of clear. These lakes go very far down. The sea level in the game is, I think, 111, something like that. The game goes up to 225 on default settings, and these lakes go down to 27, which is really deep. And if you mine a little bit below, there's a really interesting cave system which went almost all the way down to the mantle being the bedrock of this game. Now at this point you can see on the minimap we're getting to the farm, we're getting to the actual house. And there are some berries planted here. There was also a tree farm, but I didn't really check back on it. There were some more berries, pit where we mined lead. And here you can see the deep lake. You can't really see it actually, but you can just see that it goes down, and with the actual ice bugging the textures you can kind of notice the outlines. Now, in the last part of the tour, the last few minutes, I just want to show off this house. This was interesting. This was like a return to the roots. It was like playthrough. It was a playthrough of the start of the game. It was really fun to actually go through it, even though it was quite a short period. This was a very, very good storage system, actually much better than the one at Zavolf, as it was just more organized. But it did kind of burn down completely once, so this is technically the second iteration. There is the underground area, which was the source of the house, but as you can see, everything but the honey has completely rotted away in this time, which is fairly depressing. Up here lays the pit kiln, one with actually fired bricks, and you can see we used coal because this area was so rich that after mining so much coal with dynamite, there was practically no reason not to use it. There was, of course, the smithing area, which was fairly interesting. It was fairly compacted. We had quite a bit of steel and iron tools. And then we had all of our ores. You can see how much really dense iron there is up there. It would have converted into 12 stacks if we ever got around to here. These were the export chests designed to hold all of the resources that we would move back to Zavolf for museum storage. There was also this dock. There are no boats, nor was this a big lake, but it was just pretty to have. And at this point I tried to make a bed, so I looked for resources a bit. But sadly I'll have to gather the grass by hand. Besides that, well, I don't know, not much to say about the place. There was a huge mountain down there, but there are some things that I just don't have time to show off here. There are of course copper spears that were gotten by panning the actual sharp bits for them. We used bismuth bronze here, which is fairly ugly but fairly good, because we couldn't make tin bronze fast enough. There simply wasn't enough tin bands here. And, well, yeah, sadly the place has been abandoned. Now, in this last part of the actual tour, I think I just need to explain why everybody left. It isn't anything depressing, nobody died, it wasn't like some kind of really tragic thing. But we simply slowly stopped playing because we figured, since the lore update is right around the corner, we might as well try and not play the game for a while, keep it exciting for when we actually return and explore the new areas. We had a whole plan how we would set up camp if there was a new zone, how we would try and set up like a fortress there, and get as many resources as possible, and kind of troll others by making sure that we got all of the good resource spots before anybody else. Sadly, this plan, well, never really will be able to happen, even though I had realized recently that it would have been a lot more possible than I had usually imagined. And, well, we tried to like wait it out, and we were quite hyped. We were already planning on how we were gonna do anything. But then, one day in the actual group DM that we had on Discord, our leader Frolic said that it had been a fairly nice run, and that, yeah, sadly, it was just a good experience that was going to pass. I was confused, looked at the official Discord of the server, and I looked at the announcement, and it simply turns out it was not feasible to actually keep the server going. It's a bit of a sad thing, but all good things must come to an end, and I gotta say, this thing was a really good one. Finally, it's very nostalgic seeing this area up here with so many trees, all of the greenery, these bauxite mountains, and all of the emptiness around it actually. Yeah, and the roofless parts of the house. But yeah, people slowly left, it was fun while it lasted, and now I'm here just to record everything that had happened until then, so that it does not get forgotten. Yeah. This is it. For those who watched till the end, I hope you enjoyed all of this, and I hope you see that this game, this server, and this crew that I was a part of was quite an experience. So thank you to Mudwall, to Zavolf, to all of the members of the Zavolf crew, and everything else.